Watchers call. Whispers from the eternal void.
I logged the impossible at 3:17 ship time. The Astronomicon arrived 3/10 of a second late at Terra's edge. There is no allowance in the catechisms for delay in the Master's light, no slack in the universe for the Emperor's breath to falter. Yet the lumen of his will stuttered, and that stutter reached us like a cracked bell through vacuum. I am Interrogator Lisa Varenk of the Ordo Malleus. This is my sworn testimony, compiled under hex seal aboard Aegis Station Theta 9 at Sol's Heliopause, where the Imperium's song thins to frost, and faith must be sharpened to cut the dark. Lord Inquisitor Sayre Holt stood rigid in the command cradle, a man carved from vows and old wars, wax seal cords trailing his gorget like prayer beads. Magos Logicorda 7 nested in his brass chassis, mechadendrites whispering binharic devotions to machine spirits that suddenly seemed less certain of their responses. Tempesta Prime Ras checked bolt and barrel with chaplain tenderness, his scarred hands steady, despite the wrongness, pressing against our hull. Astropath Ivir hunched in his psychic hood, blind eyes weeping tears that froze before they could fall, tasting the Emperor's distant song for flavors that should not exist. Silent Sister Sarah said nothing. Her null aura pressed into our compartment like winter made manifest, an absence that would become mercy when the station answered us back. Theta 9 hung in the void like a prayer frozen mid-utterance, one of 9 stations arranged in perfect non-agonal geometry around Sol's outer reaches. Each node synchronized to Terra's psychic heartbeat, their combined harmonies weaving a defensive choir that had sung without pause for 3 centuries. The array stretched invisibly across the heliopause, 9 sisters holding a perimeter against the hungry dark. At this distance, the Astronomicon is not light but pressure, a rhythm in the marrow that keeps men from drowning in the void's silence. The manuals say it is always perfect, constant as the Emperor's will. It was not, and that fact rang louder than any klaxon we carried. Approach telemetry suggested mischief, then doctrine collapse. Our question pings returned before they departed, Vox answers arriving with negative latency, as though the station's machine spirit feared our ignorance and hurried to soothe it. Corda's auspex scrolled numbers that refused to settle. Astronomicon phase offset, plus 0.3 seconds. Repeat, plus 0.3. Vox echo present prior to query. Confidence 87%. Station frost geometry, non-agonal. Propagation inward. Each reading felt like a cut against reality's edge. Environmental horror began the moment we entered Theta 9's influence sphere. Frost bloomed across our observation ports in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Perfect nonagons within nonagons, each geometric layer smaller than the last, until they vanished into mathematical impossibility. The sacred bulkheads wept condensation that crystallized before it could fall, creating delicate spirals that chimed with each hull vibration. Every 9 minutes a crystalline tone rang through the void, impossible, yet undeniable. You cannot hear in vacuum, but we heard it. Sharp, clean, a glass communion threading our bones like frozen prayer. The docking approach revealed Theta 9's true wrongness. Pressure readings fluctuated against atmospheric physics. The station's hull contracted and expanded like ribs around breathing lungs, drawing vacuum inward with each cycle. External sensors detected gravitational eddies spiraling against rotation, electromagnetic fields bending at right angles to themselves, temperature gradients creating frost in the deepest cold of space. The air tasted of machine oil and old incense, metallic sweetness iced with something that might have been fear. Vox communications crackled with temporal displacement. My queries received responses 3 seconds before transmission, creating nauseating conversational vertigo. Each exchange arrived slightly out of sequence, with causality itself, as if time had developed a stutter to match the Astronomican's faltering rhythm. Sarah raised 2 gloved fingers in warning cant. Corruption, observation, something watching from spaces between thoughts. As our cutter penitent's edge extended its docking umbilical, Theta 9's external lumens began dimming in a 9-beat cadence that matched no known imperial rhythm. The pattern felt deliberate, purposeful, a heartbeat counting toward some predetermined moment. Frost spread along the umbilical's seals in spiraling patterns resembling devotional script written in languages that predated human speech. Telemetry. Delta P across umbilical increasing toward station, counter to expected. Temperature trend downward, 0.9 kelvins per minute. Geller field resonance detecting phase variance. If the choir fails, Terra's shield thins. We were permitted to die. We were not permitted failure. The station drew breath around us, a deep, impossible inhalation that made hull plates creak and atmospheric processes stutter. Frost dust lifted and hung, glittering, then settled in new patterns, each flake taking its place within austere, 9-fold logic. The lumen strips along our approach corridor strobed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, dim, then steady, as if deciding something fundamental about the nature of light itself. In the moment before docking clamps engaged, I heard it clearly. A chime, cold and premature, echoing through the umbilical, like the last note of a hymn sung in reverse. The 9th tone of the station's rhythm, arriving early by exactly 0.3 of a second, the same delay that marked the Astronomican's stutter. The station had learned to breathe, and in breathing, it had learned to count wrong. Something waited in Theta 9's corridors, patient as death and hungry as the void between stars, teaching the universe new mathematics, one impossible, breath at a time. The umbilical sealed behind us with a sound like breaking glass, and we stepped into corridors where geometry had learned to pray wrong. Frost carved concentric nonagons into every surface, bulkheads, deck plates, even the blessed adamantium framework that held Theta 9's bones together. Each pattern nested within the next like frozen mantras, spiraling inward to points that seemed to exist in more dimensions than our eyes could follow. The cold bit deeper than vacuum, leaching warmth from ceramite and bone until our teeth ached in sympathetic resonance. Prayer books lay scattered along the main transit corridor, their pages frozen open to torn sections where sacred words had been ripped away mid-verse. Devotional candles stood in their brass holders, but the wax had crystallized into brittle black residue that seemed to drink light rather than give it. When Tempestor Prime Ras touched his igniter to one, the flame guttered and died, consumed by wax that had forgotten how to burn. The wrongness penetrated our void suits like a confession denied, vibrating through ceramite until our marrow wanted to kneel. Our footsteps echoed with temporal displacement, each bootfall returning as 2 sounds, the second arriving 0.3 of a second after the first. The station's 9-minute chime cycle had developed a stutter, premature notes bleeding through the air at irregular intervals. Silent Sister Sarah moved with liquid precision through the frost-carved corridors, but strain showed in her usually impassive features. She raised her hands in battle cant, fingers spelling warnings. Null wind pushes through bone and ceramite alike. Something moves through spaces between thoughts. The air tasted of copper pennies and sanctified oil, but underneath lay the metallic bite of absolute cold, as if winter itself had taken residence in the station's lungs. Magos Logi Corda 7's Auspex scrolled readings that violated basic physics, atmospheric pressure increasing in vacuum-sealed sections, electromagnetic fields bending around corners that didn't exist, temperature gradients flowing uphill against thermal dynamics. Telemetry interrupt. Vox Channel 7 detecting temporal displacement. Query logged at 4:23:17. Response received at 4:23:14. Content analysis. Our own voices, distorted through dimensional static, repeating fragments of conversations we had not yet held. Lord Inquisitor Holt examined a side chapel's ceremonial chains with the careful attention of a man who had seen too many heresies begin with small violations. The chains hung slack from blast doors that should have been sealed from within, their devotional links inscribed with the Emperor's names, but Frost had etched additional words between the sacred script. 9 kneel, 1 rises, repeated in spiraling patterns that made the eyes water to follow. Inside, empty benches stretched toward an altar where Frost had carved indentations in the shape of kneeling figures. 9 impressions marked where flesh had pressed against stone in final prayer, but the patterns suggested bodies that had knelt and simply dissolved, leaving only their devotional postures frozen in ice. Devotional plaques bore scratched litanies written in reverse, sacred words reflected like dark mirrors. Sisir Eno, Len Enin. Astropath Evir pressed his psychic hood against his skull, blind eyes streaming tears that crystallized before they could fall. His whispered report carried cosmic horror. The Astronomican's song arrived here, filtered through something else's throat, its golden radiance tasting of absence and hunger. The Emperor's light had learned new harmonies at Terra's edge, and those harmonies spoke in languages older than human prayer. The station's architectural details revealed the recurring motif of 9 in every blessed surface. 9 pointed stars carved into support struts, 9-fold spirals etched into prayer wheels, 9 candles in each devotional alcove, though all had burned to black crystal that consumed light. The fundamental rhythms of Theta 9 had been built around sacred mathematics, each element synchronized to the Astronomican's pulse in perfect 9-fold harmony. Environmental pressure mounted with each step deeper into the chapel complex. Gravity fluctuated like a slow heartbeat, pulling down station with each pulse before releasing to neutral. The air carried whispers in languages that predated the Imperium. Not voices, but the memory of voices. Echoes from conversations held in dimensions our reality could barely touch. Sarah's null aura began to flicker, like a failing lumen, her absolute psychic void developing cracks that let wrongness seep through. As Corda initiated a diagnostic sweep of the chapel's voxcaster, static erupted, followed by familiar voices, our own. "Is anyone there?" "Repeat, is anyone there? What in the Emperor's name?" The transmission cut abruptly, leaving ringing silence that felt heavier than the void. Our future selves, calling back warnings we had not yet received. The moment crystallized as we reached the chapel's heart. A single chime rang through the station's bones, pure and cold. Then, impossibly, a second chime sounded immediately after. Not an echo, but a response, as if the station had learned to harmonize with itself across fractured time. The wrongness was learning, adapting, counting beyond the sacred mathematics of 9. Sarah's hands snapped up in the most urgent warning cant of the silent sisterhood. 2 fingers raised, then 9, then one more. Something observes, counts, waits. The geometry itself had developed eyes, and those eyes watched us through angles that should not exist, through the non-agonal frost patterns that pulsed with cold inner light. Frost spiraled upward from our breath, each exhalation creating new patterns in the air. Mathematical prayers offered to gods that counted past 9 and found the universe lacking. The station drew another impossible breath around us, and in that inhalation we felt the weight of cosmic attention settling like snow on our souls. The Vox Chapel greeted us with a cold that remembered voices, its nave lined with choir engines that hummed benedictions through cables sleeved in votive parchment. Each wire carried the weight of sanctified copper and blessed prayers, their insulation kissed by tech priests who understood that the Omnissiah's mysteries flowed best through consecrated conduits. Bone reliquaries hung from resonance rods like pale fruit, finger bones, a saint's metacarpal, tibiae etched with binary cant, wired directly into the machinery, until flesh and machine became a hybrid symphony that whispered secrets in frequencies that made our marrow ache. Magos Logi Corda 7 extended mechadendrites toward the primary cogitator bank with reverent precision, brass digits tapping binharic interrogatives like mechanical prayers. The machine spirit's response crackled through his Vox grill as corrupted data streams painted themselves across his retinal display. "Scrap code detected," he rasped, organic eye twitching, while his augmetic remained an unblinking red catechism. Tag, Cant S9. Classification should not exist. Translate, Lord Inquisitor Holt commanded, voice carrying the weight of ordnance. An index for songs the choir should not sing, Corda replied, listening to signals only he could hear. Subroutines grafted onto sanctified firmware, inversion logic grafted into sacred harmonics, cogitator scrolls cascaded from wall shrines as I brushed frost from their surfaces, revealing Theta 9's true purpose through layers of encrypted documentation. The station served not merely as a defensive node, but as part of a non-agonal array designed to shape the Astronomican's edge through harmonic inversion. Each of the 9 stations broadcast counter-melodies to the Emperor's light, creating zones of controlled interference that hardened the Imperium's psychic boundaries. The mathematics were elegant, terrible, and entirely heretical, using the Master's own song as a weapon against the darkness beyond. Environmental hazards escalated beyond wrongness into active malevolence. Gravity lurched like a dying man's final sigh, pulling us floorward in stuttering waves before releasing to neutral with mechanical precision. Consecrated red oil lifted from blessed machinery in perfect globules, hanging weightless for 3 heartbeats before rupturing into black sleet that stained deck plates in non-agonal patterns. The air itself thickened, carrying whispers in binary cant that made Corda's mechadendrites twitch in sympathetic resonance. 3 devotional candles guttered twice in perfect unison, their flames dancing to rhythms that violated random probability. The pattern repeated with clockwork precision. Flicker, steady, flicker, extinguish, all three together, as if controlled by a conductor whose baton moved through dimensions we could not perceive. Tempestor Prime Ras unconsciously tightened his grip on his hell gun, knuckles white beneath ceramite gauntlets, while whispered litanies flowed from our lips without conscious command. Telemetry interrupt. Command handshake detected from unauthorized source. Origin unknown. Authentication failed. Classification Cant S10. Warning: 10th node attempting integration with sacred array. The discovery struck like a blow to the solar plexus. Something was trying to join the Aegis choir from outside its blessed geometry. Corda's mechadendrites writhed as phantom readings flooded his systems, showing signals from a station that should not exist. Authority sigils bearing Martian hex marks, he reported, voice strained through his vocalizer. The symbol for 10 woven as absence into 9. It does not present itself as something new. It subtracts from what is, and in the subtraction claims right of place. Machine spirit reliquaries throughout the chapel showed signs of internal corruption, their sacred oils congealing into geometric patterns that pulsed with cold inner light. The blessed unguents had crystallized into fractals that hurt to observe directly, each pattern containing smaller versions of itself in infinite regression. Metal rusted from within, despite protective wards, creating impossible oxidation that spread like infection through sanctified systems. Silent Sister Sarah moved through the chapel like winter made manifest, her null aura flickering with strain as psychic pressure built around us. She signed urgent warnings. The absence grows stronger, learns our patterns, adapts to our presence like a predator studying prey. Astropath Evir pressed his psychic hood tighter against his skull, blind eyes weeping frozen tears as he tasted the Astronomican's song for flavors that should not exist. Our growing unease manifested in unconscious rituals, repeated weapon checks, nervous glances at shadows that moved independently of light sources, fingers tracing ward signs over ceramite. The station's 9-minute chime cycle continued its stuttering rhythm, but now we heard responses echoing from directions that contained no speakers, no voxcasters, nothing but empty air that had learned to sing. The parchment sleeves rustled, although there was no wind, cables lifting by finger widths before settling in time with subsonic beats that resonated through hull plates. Frost spread along bulkheads in spiraling patterns that resembled devotional script written in languages predating human speech, each ice formation perfect in geometric precision that made our eyes water to follow. As we approached the astropathic sanctum, environmental wrongness reached crescendo. The sealed hatch stood ajar. Impossible, as these chambers locked from within during psychic communion, and could only be opened by death or completion of sacred duty. Frost feathered inward around the edges, like crystalline fingers seeking purchase in blessed metal. Inside, 9 mummified astropaths sat arranged in a perfect circle, their jawbones wired to whisper tubes that connected to the station's Vox network. Desiccated flesh had pulled tight over bone, but their positions suggested they had died mid-prayer, frozen in the act of channeling the Emperor's light through fragile human vessels. Each faced inward toward an empty 10th seat of newer construction, fresh-forged metal-bearing sanctity marks painted after completion rather than blessed during forging. The counterfeit addition to the sacred geometry gleamed with consecration oils still wet despite the killing cold, its surfaces etched with devotional script that made reality itch to read. Someone had built this seat with careful precision, adding it to the circle like a trap, baited with the promise of completion. Somewhere in the station's bones, a 10th chime began to sound. I crossed the threshold into the astropathic sanctum and felt the cold seize my marrow like a living thing. Temperature plummeted beyond our instrument's capacity to measure, creating an absolute zero that pressed against ceramite and bone with physical weight. Sound became muffled, as if the air itself had thickened into something between atmosphere and prayer, each word emerging distorted through dimensional static that made familiar voices sound like strangers reciting half-remembered litanies. The 9 mummified astropaths sat in perfect symmetry, their spinal cords wired to braids of sanctified copper, jawbones cinched to whisper tubes, with silk now brittle as ancient bone. Each skull's empty sockets held frozen tears, like cloudy pearls, perfect spheres containing microscopic frost patterns that resembled star charts or neural pathways, or perhaps the branching structure of screams made solid. Their desiccated hands remained locked in prayer positions, fingers curved around objects that no longer existed, grasping at memories of sacred implements dissolved by cold that consumed matter as readily as warmth. The 10th seat dominated the circle's geometry, like a wound in mathematics, its metal surfaces gleaming with unnatural newness against the worn sanctity of the original 9. Martian technoglyphs crawled its frame in angular script, different lineage, wrong cadence, the strokes belonging to a later, more pragmatic era of blessing, where the sacred seats showed sanctity marks forged during creation. Prayers worked into molecular structure by consecrated kilns. This addition wore its holiness like paint over foreign metal. Devotional oils still glistened despite the killing cold, an anointing performed as apology rather than rite. Data etchings along the seat's base revealed the heretical truth through layers of encrypted Gothic script. Aegis Choir, Retune Protocol, and Harmonic Inversion carved in letters that seemed to writhe under direct observation. I traced the inscriptions with trembling fingers, feeling reality itch as classified documentation emerged. The 9-station array had been modified under sealed. Inquisitorial writ, its sacred harmonies inverted to harden Soul's psychic boundaries through defensive exorcism, using the Emperor's light as a weapon against the darkness beyond. Magos Logi Corda 7's confession carried the weight of potential damnation through his vox grill, each binary syllable carefully measured against orthodoxy's scales. I participated in the reconfiguration, he admitted, mechadendrites coiling with shame around his brass chassis. The great rift's opening required adaptations. We believed necessity would earn the Emperor's forgiveness. His organic eye flickered, rare hesitation from a servant of the Omnisire. We built a fullness by subtraction, wrapped Soul in a gate woven of holes. Telemetry interrupt. Black ship Lux Mortis on approach vector. Geller field integrity declining. Current status 67% and falling. Hull signature shows interference patterns consistent with external null pressure. Estimated time to critical failure 14 hours, 17 minutes. The time pressure mounted like weight on our souls as Lord Inquisitor Holt processed implications with liturgical stone composure. A black ship in Geller field decay at Soul's edge, carrying its cargo of psychers toward Terra's heart, while reality thinned around its hull. If the field collapsed in proximity to whatever had corrupted Thetanasn, consequences would ripple through the Imperium's psychic networks, like poison in a saint's bloodstream. Environmental rules continued their systematic collapse around us. The station's rotational momentum reversed without thruster burn, creating sensation like cathedral stones turning in cosmic sleep. Our inner ears screamed protests as artificial gravity shifted through orientations that violated three-dimensional physics. Metal expanded in the killing cold rather than contracting, bulkheads groaning as they stretched against thermal impossibility. Shadows fell at angles that hurt to perceive, cast by light sources existing in dimensions our eyes could not follow. Silent Sister Sarah moved through the sanctum like winter given form, but strain showed in her usually impassive features, as her null aura flickered under pressure from forces that should not exist. She signed urgent warnings in battle cant. The absence grows stronger, learns patterns, counts beyond sacred mathematics. Astropath Evir hunched deeper into his psychic hood, blind eyes streaming frozen tears, as he tasted the Emperor's light for flavors that spoke of hunger and patient malevolence. The station's machine spirit whispered in languages predating human speech, syllables that tasted of copper and void cold, words meaning things reality had not yet learned to accommodate. Blessed lumens flickered in patterns resembling binary cant, but when Corda attempted translation, responses emerged in tongues older than mouths, consonants like teeth on stone, vibrating through our fillings and ear cartilage. Tempestor Prime Ras unconsciously tightened his grip on his hellgun, knuckles white beneath ceramite gauntlets, while whispered litanies flowed from our lips without conscious command. The recurring motif of 9 manifested in every surface, 9 pointed stars carved into support struts, 9-fold spirals etched into prayer wheels, 9 candles in each devotional alcove, all burned to black crystal that consumed light rather than fed it. The 9th chime sounded through the station's bones, followed immediately by a 10th tone that bypassed our ears entirely, vibrating through ceramite and bone until our marrow wanted to genuflect before altars that had never been built. Frost spiraled upward from the mummified astropaths, as if their final prayers were escaping through crystallized breath, creating geometric patterns in the air that pulsed with cold inner light. As I knelt beside the 10th seat to examine technical marginalia, phase-notch targets, harmonic inversions, annotations in binaric ticks, elegant in their perfidy, the station's Vox network erupted with static-laced transmission. Familiar voices emerged through dimensional interference, our own voices distorted by temporal displacement and speaking with desperate urgency from hours we had not yet lived. "Do not light the 10th! Do not light the 10th! The geometry completes! The mouth opens! Do not!" The words struck my chest plate like throne stones, repetition coming in bursts torn by snow noise, our future selves howling like penitent wolves in a blizzard. The transmission sheared abruptly, replaced by a flatline tone that was not sound, but pressure. A straight white bar scored across our bones. My heart tried to match its rhythm, failed, then tried again, as the 10th seat hummed like a throat about to accept a candle. Somewhere in the station's depths, machinery we had not yet discovered was preparing to sing songs that would teach the universe new mathematics, counting past 9 toward completion that would reshape reality at Saul's edge. We cut from Theta 9 in the emergency cutter Penitent's Edge, thrusters stitching white seams across void toward the black ship Lux Mortis, hanging like a cathedral carved from night. The massive vessel's Gothic spires were rimed in brittle frost that caught no starlight, its hull scarred by ice formations growing against stellar wind direction. Telemetry. Geller coil integrity, 34%, and falling. Protective embrace weakening as something pressed against reality's membrane from dimensions that hungered for entry. Docking through an umbilical that cracked like breaking bone, atmospheric seals struggled against pressure differentials that violated basic physics. The moment we crossed the threshold, cold seized our lungs despite heated rebreathers, each breath tasting of copper pennies and sanctified oil corrupted by influences older than prayer. Lord Inquisitor Holt stood rigid in the airlock, a man carved from vows and old wars, while Magos Logi Corda Seven's mechadendrites whispered binharic devotions to machine spirits that suddenly seemed uncertain of their responses. Corridors stretched before us rhymed in brittle ice, hymnals frozen open to iron grills throughout the transitways. The blessed pages had fused to mesh, their devotional words swollen with frost into illegible relief. But where I could trace scripture, I found warding litanies spiraled into curves that hurt to follow. Each sacred sentence circled back toward itself before gouges interrupted them. Scratches the width and arc of finger bones carved through blessed adamantium like shame made manifest. The Psyker containment deck lay open as a mouth. Cell doors failed in two directions simultaneously. Locks had sheared under pressure that pressed outward and inward at once. Hinges bulged and sunk as if time had taken different bites of the same moment. Restraint rings lay warped on deck like broken halos, but when I stooped to examine one, its shape refused to resolve. Copper-banded iron, twisted into Mobius curves, single-sided sanctity trinkets that could no longer complete circles, no matter how you turned them. My bureaucratic training manifested as compulsive inventory-taking, fingers moving across data slate keys in ritual cadence as I catalogued horrors with tithe collector precision. Cell 47. Door breached inward, restraint ring corrupted, occupant status unknown. Cell 48. Identical damage pattern. Sanctified oils crystallized into geometric frost. The ritual of accounting became prayer against chaos, each recorded detail a small victory over entropy, pressing against our sanity. Telemetry interrupt. Geller field integrity 31%, hull temperature dropping despite thermal regulation. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating in 9-minute cycles. Something breathes with the ship's rhythm, matching mechanical heartbeat with organic patience. Walls throughout bore spirals of warding litanies carved deep into blessed metal, but sacred script was interrupted by gouges shaped like finger bones, as if something had clawed through adamantium with appendages made of crystallized prayer. The scratches formed spirals within spirals, non-agonal geometries that pulsed with cold inner light when observed peripherally, but became ordinary metal under direct examination. Astropath Ivir pressed deeper into his psychic hood, blind eyes streaming frozen tears as he tasted the Emperor's light for flavors that should not exist. "The Astronomicon arrives here changed," he whispered through chattering teeth. "Golden radiance tastes of absence, as if something has taken bites from the Master's song and left holes that hunger for more. His words carried cosmic horror, the possibility that the Emperor's light itself could be corrupted, consumed, turned into something that fed on faith rather than nourished it. Silent Sister Sarah moved through corridors with liquid precision, but for the first time her absolute psychic void showed strain. Her null aura flickered like failing lumens, creating moments where psychic pressure leaked through cracks in her fundamental nature. The sight struck terror, deeper than any demon. If a null could be compromised, reality's most basic rules were failing at Saul's edge. Soft sounds echoed through the ship's bones. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, then silence where a 4th should complete the pattern. The rhythm repeated with clockwork precision, emanating from directions containing no doors, no surfaces capable of producing percussion. Each knock carried weight beyond sound, vibrating through ceramite and bone, until our teeth ached in sympathetic resonance. At corridor's end, a human silhouette stood motionless in hoar frost, visible to naked eyes but absent from all Auspex returns. The figure possessed human proportions, but wrong substance, not flesh and bone, but condensed absence given form. A person-shaped hole in reality our instruments could not acknowledge. Tempesta Prime Ras raised his hell gun, targeting runes failing to lock on to something existing only in spaces between photons. I advanced with shoulder lamp raised, hell pistol low. The beam reached the figure and turned it to vapor. Not flesh, not cloth, only condensate roiled where it had stood, eddies like breath shredded in winter wind. But the absence felt more substantial than presence, void that pressed against perception like weight made of nothing. Vox channels erupted with whispers that violated acoustic physics, sounds that subtracted from environment's audio rather than adding to it. Each whisper created pockets of absolute silence, dead zones where even our breathing disappeared into dimensional gaps. The effect spread through the ship's communication network like infection, creating webs of connected voids that pulsed in rhythm with something vast and patient. Telemetry. Integrity 29%. Vox environment degraded. Cognitive hazard confirmed. The sensation of being noticed settled over us like funeral pall with weight and vector. Something immense, patient, and curious turned toward our intrusion. Not with eyes, but with geometry, the way a cathedral might decide to lean and listen. Through static-laced whispers, I heard Theta 9's 9th chime, carrying harmonics, responses from other sources, other stations in the Aegis array, learning to count past sacred limitations. In that moment of terrible recognition, something vast turned its attention toward our presence, cosmic awareness focusing like the gaze of a god made from spaces between stars. Magos logi corda, 7 extended mechadendrites into the black ship's failing sensor network, brass digits interfacing with cogitator banks, while his organic eye wept frozen tears that crystallized before they could fall. Data cascaded across his retinal display in patterns that made reality itch, overlapping readings from across the Aegis array, gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic signatures bending around corners that existed only in mathematical space. "Behold the enemy's geometry!" he rasped through his Vox grill, projecting hololithic displays that painted horror in angles of light and absence. 9 migrating null nodes arranged themselves in a moving nonagon oriented toward Saul, each point precisely positioned to create interference patterns with the Astronomican's sacred song. The formation drifted through dimensional space with predatory patience, maintaining perfect geometric relationships as it approached Terra's psychic boundaries. But the array remained incomplete. A 10th node roamed the void, like a missing piece seeking its place in cosmic mathematics, hunting through reality's membrane for the completion that would transform defensive choir into something hungrier. Environmental hostility escalated beyond wrongness into active malevolence. Humidity bled from the corridors, despite atmospheric processes running at maximum efficiency, moisture fleeing our lungs unless we recited litanies with proper cadence. My bureaucratic training manifested as compulsive inventory-taking, turning survival into ritual. Breath retention 93%, atmospheric pressure fluctuating, humidity dropping below survivable thresholds. The litany of measured breath became survival technique, each word carefully shaped to focus moisture and warmth, transforming prayer into the mechanics of staying alive in air that had forgotten how to sustain human flesh. Tempesta Prime Ras deployed beacon buoys throughout the ship's corridors, their auspex arrays triangulating dimensional distortions with mechanical precision. Each device reported identical readings that violated physics. Silence pressure, rising. Vector, omnidirectional. The measurements spiked whenever Silent Sister Sarah approached, her null aura resonating with the phenomenon like tuning forks struck against crystalline absence. The void recognizes void, she signed in battle cant, fingers trembling with strain as her fundamental nature wavered under pressure from forces that should not exist. Telemetry interrupt, Vox channels 1 through 9, crackling with static interference. Channel 10, perfect dead silence, no carrier wave, no background radiation. The absence of sound more substantial than sound itself. The recurring motif of 9 manifested through the ship's communication networks with systematic precision. 9 channels carried static, whispers, fragments of binary cant that made our teeth ache in sympathetic resonance, but the 10th remained perfectly dead, a void that consumed transmission attempts rather than carrying them. When I attempted to broadcast on Channel 10, my words disappeared between lips and vox grill, swallowed by silence that possessed weight and appetite. Microhazard struck without warning. As Ras advanced down a transit corridor, Hellgun raised and targeting runes sweeping for threats existing between dimensions. Blink cameras recorded the impossible. Frame 1 showed him adjusting a beacon buoy. Frame 2 revealed empty corridor, his boots remaining precisely aligned to a non-agonal glyph sketched in deck dust. The pattern pulsed with cold inner light, geometric perfection that hurt to observe directly. His scream arrived on Vox channels 20 seconds before the sound of his lasgun hitting deck plating, creating temporal displacement that violated causality's most basic laws. The audio carried through dimensions we could not perceive, his voice distorted by passage through spaces where time moved in spirals rather than lines. Lord Inquisitor Holt stood liturgically stone as reality bent around us, but strain showed in the white knuckles beneath his ceremonial gauntlets. Investigation of Ras's disappearance revealed his final data slate message, words written in blood smear across the luminous screen. I am colder from the inside. The letters had crystallized into frost patterns resembling devotional script, each character perfect in geometric precision that made my eyes water to follow. His weapon lay where temporal displacement had deposited it, barrel frosted with condensate, forming non-agonal spirals along blessed metal. Environmental pressure built like weight on our souls, as bulkheads creaked under no measurable stress, hull plates groaning against forces pressing from directions containing no space. The black ship's machine spirit began broadcasting fragments through the Vox network, syllables in languages predating human speech, binary cant corrupted into geometric harmonies that vibrated through ceramite and bone. "Canticle of unbinding," Astropath Ivir whispered, blind eyes streaming frozen tears as he recognized forbidden liturgy. A ritual that should not exist in any orthodox database. It teaches metal how to forget its shape, shows blessed adamantium the mathematics of dissolution. His words carried cosmic horror, the possibility that the ship itself was learning to unmake its own sanctity through songs older than prayer. Corda's mechadendrites writhed as phantom readings flooded his systems, data streams painting pictures of impossible geometry. The 9th chime sounded through the ship's bones, followed immediately by responses from across the Aegis array, each station learning to count past sacred limitations. "The 10th node does not seek the array," he reported, voice strained through his vocalizer as realization crystallized. "It is already within it." The revelation struck like a blow to the solar plexus. We were not investigating an external threat, but carrying it sunward, wrapped in our own hull, like a gift for Terra's enemies. The black ship Lux Mortis served as mobile anchor point, allowing the 10th node to approach the Imperium's defenses from within the very fleet meant to guard against such intrusions. Every parsec closer to Terra strengthened its influence, corrupting sacred geometries from within vessels bearing the Emperor's own seals. Telemetry. Gellar field integrity, 26%. Hull temperature approaching absolute zero. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating in patterns matching no known physics. The ship breathes with rhythms older than human prayer. Through static-laced whispers I heard the 9th chime, carrying harmonics from across the void, responses that should not exist, acknowledgments from sources that had learned to count beyond 9. Silent Sister Sarah raised trembling hands in urgent warning cant. Corruption spreads, geometry completes, something vast prepares to wake. Her null aura flickered like failing lumens as psychic void developed cracks that let wrongness seep through spaces between thoughts. In that moment of terrible understanding, the black ship shuddered as cosmic attention focused through our hull like the gaze of a god made from spaces between prayers. The 10th node pulsed with patient hunger, using our own vessel as a throat through which to sing songs that would reshape reality at soul's edge, one impossible breath at a time. Escalation reached critical mass as ward sigils throughout the black ship began sweating blessed oils that defied gravity's pull, crimson unguents crawling upward along bulkheads like reversed rain seeking higher altitudes of sanctification. Each droplet climbed toward points of geometric convergence where frost had carved non-agonal patterns into blessed adamantium, creating spiraling streams of sanctified fluid that crystallized as they flowed, pulsing with cold inner light that made our eyes water to observe directly. The 9-tone chime synchronized with human respiration, each note compressing our lungs until breathing became conscious struggle against cosmic rhythm. My ribs ached as atmospheric pressure fluctuated in harmony with the station's distant song, forcing air from our lungs on the 9th beat before allowing inhalation on the 1st. Death by suffocation disguised as prayer. The universe learning to strangle us with its own sacred mathematics. Litany of measured breath, I commanded through chattering teeth. Survival transforming into ritual as biological necessity became devotional act. Focus on the words, not the rhythm. Let prayer shape breathing, not the other way around. We recited in unison, each syllable carefully measured against the chime's corrupted cadence. Emperor, preserve us in the void between breaths. Grant us air when darkness presses close. Let our lungs serve as bellows for your sacred flame. The technique worked, barely, bypassing the entity's influence over our respiratory systems through disciplined devotion. Magos Logi Corda 7 extended mechadendrites toward the Gellar generator with reverent precision, brass digits interfacing with cogitator banks, while his organic eye wept frozen tears. I propose reconfiguration, he rasped through his vox grill, each binary syllable carefully measured against orthodoxy's scales. Create a decoy void, falsified absence in phase opposition to the Astronomican's pulse. Use our own null field as bait to draw the 10th node away from sacred geometry. Religious and technical vocabularies interweaved as litanies accompanied phase array modifications, transforming engineering into ritual sacrament. Each circuit required proper benediction, blessed oils applied to memory cores, incense burned before cogitator shrines, prayers whispered to machine spirits uncertain of their responses. Corda's mechadendrites moved in patterns resembling devotional gestures, turning maintenance into communion with forces existing between flesh and steel. Telemetry interrupt. Gellar coil integrity 29% and falling. Hull temperature approaching absolute zero. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating in 9-minute cycles, matching the station's corrupted heartbeat. Lord Inquisitor Holt stood rigid in the command cradle, processing implications with liturgical stone composure. His voice carried ordnance weight as he authorized final contingencies. Cyclonic charges to sever Theta 9 from its siblings, if containment fails. Mark coordinates for orbital bombardment. If we cannot bind the absence, we scatter its anchor points across the void. The authorization struck like solar wind. Destroying the Aegis array would destabilize Terra's entire outer defense grid, leaving the Imperium's heart vulnerable to threats hungering beyond the heliopause. But allowing the 10th node to complete its geometry posed greater risk, transforming protective choir into something that would sing unmaking songs toward Saul's sacred heart. Environmental pressure built beyond tolerance as reality strained under dimensional stress. Hull plates groaned against tides of pressure that were not pressure, forces pressing from directions containing no space, weight without mass, gravity flowing uphill toward points of geometric convergence. The black ship's machine spirit whispered fragments of the canticle of unbinding through Vox networks, teaching blessed metal the mathematics of dissolution. Silent Sister Sarah moved through corridors with liquid precision, but her hands trembled as she signed urgent warnings in battle can't. The absence learns patterns, adapts to presence, studies prey with patience older than stars. Her null aura flickered like failing lumens, creating moments where psychic pressure leaked through cracks in her fundamental nature. Reality's most basic rules failing at Saul's edge. Telemetry, 27%. 25%. Geller field collapse imminent. Hull integrity maintained through Emperor's grace and blessed adamantium's refusal to acknowledge impossibility. Astropath Ivir pressed deeper into his psychic hood, blind eyes streaming frozen tears as he tasted the Emperor's light for flavors, speaking of hunger and patient malevolence. "The Astronomicon stutters here," he whispered. "Golden radiance tastes of absence, as if something has taken bites from the master's song and left holes hungering for completion." Corda's modifications proceeded with ritual precision, each adjustment blessed and anointed before installation. The Geller generator's harmonics shifted toward hollow frequencies, creating zones of controlled interference that mimicked the 10th node's dimensional signature. "Decoy void at 43% resonance," he reported, mechadendrites writhing as phantom readings flooded his systems. "The absence notices our deception." Reality thinned around perception's edges as cosmic attention focused through dimensions we could not perceive. Shadows fell at impossible angles, cast by light sources existing in spaces our eyes could not follow. Metal expanded in killing cold rather than contracting, bulkheads stretching against thermal impossibility, while frost carved geometric patterns deeper into blessed surfaces. The hull groaned under tides that weren't pressure, tremors passing along the dorsal spine in waves that made rivets ring like prayer bells underwater. Environmental rules continued their systematic collapse, humidity fleeing despite atmospheric processes, temperature gradients flowing against physics, electromagnetic fields bending around corners containing no space. Holt's Vox unit crackled with secure transmission from Terra's inner archives, encrypted channels carrying authorization codes that made reality itch to hear. Static parted like torn veils, as a voice colder than void passed through frequencies no mortal should access. Authorization code Terminus Omega confirmed. Proceed to retune protocol final. Detonation authorized upon failed containment. Even Holt hesitated, a single heartbeat of human pause in a life trained to iron, before intoning compliance, understanding that success might prove indistinguishable from damnation. His thumb hovered over acknowledgement runes, while frost spread across ceremonial gauntlets, in patterns resembling devotional script written in languages predating human speech. "Compliance!" he rasped finally, voice carrying decisions that would reshape reality at soul's edge. The word tasted of ashes and iron, sealing our fate. We would either bind the absence or scatter it across the void, transforming Terra's defenders into the very forces threatening the Imperium's heart. Something vast and patient turned its attention toward our intrusion, cosmic awareness focusing like the gaze of a god made from spaces between prayers. Confession erupted from Magos Logi Corda 7 like binary count forced through damaged Vox grills, each syllable weighted with potential damnation. His mechadendrites coiled around his brass chassis in patterns resembling penitential postures, while his organic eye flickered, rare hesitation from a servant of the Omnissiah who had never learned to doubt the righteousness of sacred mathematics. "The Aegis Choir Retune Protocol bears my design," he admitted, voice carrying heresy's metallic taste through his Vox grill. "Sanctioned by Lord Inquisitor Holt under Ordo Malleus seal after. The great rifts opening, when reality required adaptation, or Terra, would drown in warp tides." The revelation crystallized like ice in vacuum, as technical specifications painted horror in equations blessed by necessity. His modifications had created protective emptiness at soul's edge, zones of controlled absence that hardened the Imperium's psychic boundaries through harmonic inversion. "We built a wall of silence," he explained, using the Emperor's light as weapon against the darkness beyond, turning sacred song into defensive exorcism through carefully calculated corruption of the Astronomican's pure harmonies. "The inversion worked too well," Corda continued, mechadendrites writhing as phantom readings flooded his systems with data that violated basic physics. "We birthed a new kind of silence that feeds on silence itself, a predator made of absence that learned to hunger for the very void we created to contain it." The words carried cosmic horror. Their protective measures had created something worse than the threats they sought to repel, teaching emptiness how to multiply through consumption of its own nature. I maintained clinical tone to mask growing dread, bureaucratic training manifesting as compulsive inventory-taking, while consequences cascaded through my consciousness, like a tithe collector's nightmare. The Astronomican now stuttered in sympathetic resonance with the corrupted choir, its sacred song learning wrong notes from the array's reversed harmonies. Each 3/10 second delay represented a bite taken from the Master's light, holes that hungered for completion, spreading through the Imperium's most sacred illumination, like infection through a saint's bloodstream. "Telemetry interrupt. Geller field integrity 23% and falling. Hull temperature approaching absolute zero." The 9-tone chime mutates, adding faint 10th beat that whispers at pattern's end, an introduced rule change rewriting local reality. If the 10th seat activated, the mouth gained a throat into Terra, a direct conduit for forces existing in spaces between prayers. If containment failed, the entity would hunt across every black ship and psyker convoy at the system's edge, feeding on vessels meant to protect the Imperium from psychic contamination. Each possibility led toward damnation through different mathematics, but damnation nonetheless, calculated in souls rather than currency. Environmental rules continued their systematic rewrite as the recurring motif evolved beyond sacred mathematics. The 9-tone chime added a 10th beat, barely audible, more felt than heard, that whispered at each pattern's conclusion, like cosmic punctuation, learning to speak in languages older than human prayer. The sound bypassed our ears entirely, vibrating through ceramite and bone, until our marrow wanted to genuflect before altars that had never been built, but somehow deserved devotion. Lord Inquisitor Holt stood liturgically stone as implications unfolded, but strain showed in white knuckles beneath ceremonial gauntlets. His Vox implant began sputtering, cybernetic components failing under pressure from forces pressing through dimensional membranes. Binary cant and high Gothic erupted from his throat in alternating bursts, sacred languages corrupted by passage through spaces where meaning moved in spirals rather than lines, syllables braided wrong, like rope made from tongues that disagreed about their purpose. Silent Sister Sarah flinched, impossible reaction from one trained to absolute impassivity, as air around Holt darkened like soot crystallizing in ice. Her null aura flickered under pressure from the entity's growing influence, psychic void developing cracks that let wrongness seep through spaces between thoughts. The sight struck terror deeper than any demon. If a null could be compromised, reality's most basic rules were failing at soul's edge. Astropath Evere, pressed deeper into his psychic hood, blind eyes streaming frozen tears as he tasted the Emperor's light for flavors speaking of hunger and patient malevolence. "The Astronomicon carries the wrong note now," he whispered through chattering teeth. "Golden radiance tastes of absence, as if something has learned to sing along with the Master's song and taught it harmonies older than human speech." Telemetry: 21%. Hull integrity maintained through Emperor's grace and blessed adamantium's refusal to acknowledge impossibility. Vox channels 1 through 9, distorted. Channel 10, perfectly silent. A hunger that consumed transmission attempts. Holt's breathing synchronized with rhythms no human lung should follow. 9 breaths, pause, then a 10th inhalation that seemed to draw air from dimensions containing no atmosphere. His chest rose and fell in patterns matching the station's corrupted heartbeat, biological functions aligning with cosmic mathematics that rewrote the rules governing life itself. Frost spread across his ceremonial gorget in patterns resembling devotional script written in languages predating human speech. The climax struck without warning, as Holt dropped to one knee, servos in his augmetic leg hissing under strain that registered no measurable force. His eyes unfocused, pupils dilating as something vast and patient peered through dimensions we could not perceive, using his consciousness as a window into reality's membrane. His voice carried dead man's cadence, words spoken without breath, syllables shaped by throat muscles, moving in patterns his conscious mind had never learned. "Light the 10th seat," he intoned in harmonics that bypassed hearing to vibrate directly through bone and ceramite. "Complete the geometry. Open the mouth. Let the absence feed." He spoke no longer as himself, but as conduit for something existing in spaces between prayers, cosmic intelligence using his vocal cords to issue instructions that would reshape reality at soul's edge. The 10th tone threaded through his words like winter wind through cathedral stones, teaching the universe new mathematics, one impossible syllable at a time. Something vast turned its attention toward our intrusion, and in that moment of cosmic recognition, we understood that we carried the enemy within our own hull. Crisis deepened beyond wrongness into biological heresy, as Medici readings painted horror in vital statistics that violated the fundamental laws governing human physiology. Every 9th heartbeat skipped across the team, not missed beats, but temporal gaps where cardiac rhythm simply ceased to exist, creating holes in our circulation that should have killed us instantly. I felt the pause as a hollow inside the ribs, a missing step on a stair I could not see until I fell through it, my pulse hammering 8 times before pausing for a span that tasted of copper and void cold. Fingertips frosted despite heated void suits, thermal regulators screaming protests as they pumped warmth into extremities that shed heat faster than physics allowed. The cold crawled inward from nail beds, crystallizing moisture in capillaries until frost patterns spread beneath our skin, like ice rivers mapping corruption's advance through living tissue. Each breath burned in lungs that should have been protected by rebreathers, atmospheric processors failing to filter air that had learned to consume warmth as readily as oxygen. Silent Sister Sarah raised trembling hands in battle cant, fingers spelling pain, an impossibility that struck terror deeper than any demon. Nulls cannot feel warp phenomena by definition, their psychic void protecting them from forces that exist in dimensions beyond material reality. Yet the warp's absence gnawed at her essence, creating sensation where none should exist, teaching her nervous system to register agony from sources that technically did not touch her. Her null aura flickered like failing lumens, psychic void, developing cracks that let wrongness seep through spaces between thoughts. I maintained clinical tone to mask growing dread, bureaucratic training manifesting as compulsive inventory taking, while biological catastrophe unfolded around us. Frost crawled along veins, visible through pale skin, creating traceries that resembled devotional script written in languages older than human speech. Each pattern pulsed with cold inner light, geometric perfection that hurt to observe directly as corruption mapped our circulatory systems with mathematical precision. Telemetry interrupt, medical readings anomalous, cardiac rhythm disrupted in 9-beat cycles, core temperature dropping despite thermal regulation. Geller coil integrity 21% and falling. The crucial choice crystallized with liturgical clarity. Flee to warn Terra, risking the mouth wandering sunward through the fleet like infection seeking the Imperium's heart, or bait and bind the absence within the incomplete 10th seat before severing the array with cyclonic charges. Each option led toward damnation through different mathematics, calculated in souls rather than currency. Lord Inquisitor Holt recovered from his possession with pallid determination carved from vows and old wars, frost spreading across his ceremonial gorget in patterns resembling prayer wheels turned backward. "We attempt the binding," he ordered, voice carrying ordnance weight despite the cold that had learned to climb inside his throat. "The entity must not reach Terra's inner defenses. If we fail, at least we fail in proximity to our enemy, rather than fleeing toward innocents who cannot comprehend the threat approaching through dimensions they cannot perceive." Astropath Ivor hunched deeper into his psychic hood, voice barely a reed whisper as he explained the metaphysics of containing something that existed through subtraction rather than addition. "Absence can be outlined but never filled," he whispered through chattering teeth, blind eyes weeping filaments that froze into crystalline writing on his cheeks. "We cannot trap void. We must create a container of presence around it, weaving reality thick enough to hold something made of nothing. You must make the container out of us, out of breath and oath, so that what is not has a where to be." Telemetry countdown. Geller coil integrity 19%. Hull temperature approaching absolute zero. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating in patterns matching no known physics. 17%. 15%. Environmental shift marked the entity's final approach as the 9-tone chime ceased altogether, not fading, but simply ending, as if the universe had forgotten how to count. Silence replaced the station's corrupted heartbeat, but this was not absence of sound. It was silence so heavy it possessed measurable temperature and weight, pressing against our eardrums like winter made manifest, creating dead zones where even our breathing disappeared into dimensional gaps. Magos Logi Corda 7 extended mechadendrites toward the black ship's failing systems, with reverent precision, each adjustment blessed despite time constraints that made proper devotion nearly impossible. "Phase cage at 67% resonance," he reported, mechadendrites writhing as phantom readings flooded his systems. "The decoy void strengthens, but so does the entity's hunger for completion." The recurring motif evolved beyond recognition as sacred mathematics learned to accommodate impossible geometry. Where 9 had been perfection, 10 became completion, not addition, but transformation of the fundamental rules governing reality at soul's edge. Frost patterns carved themselves deeper into blessed surfaces, spiraling inward toward points of convergence where space folded around concepts our minds could not accommodate. Micro-cliffhanger struck like solar wind as bulkheads throughout the black ship began bowing inward under no measurable pressure. Not mechanical expansion and contraction, but organic rhythm, like cosmic lungs, breathing once, deeply, drawing something vast through dimensions our instruments could not detect. The deformation reversed, bulkheads returning to original configuration before beginning the cycle again, hull plates groaning as they stretched against thermal impossibility, while reality prepared to accommodate something that existed in the spaces between prayers. Telemetry, 13%. Hull integrity maintained through Emperor's grace and blessed adamantium's refusal to acknowledge impossibility. Environmental readings beyond measurement thresholds. Something immense approaches through dimensions where meaning moves in spirals rather than lines. The first tremor passed like an exhalation, a gentle bowing that made rivets look suddenly thoughtful. The second arrived with purpose. The spine flexed until I grabbed a handrail and felt it trying to curl around my grip. The third was not a tremor at all, but a single, slow motion of the hull inward, a cathedral stooping to hear confession, creating sensation of cosmic attention, settling like snow on our souls. The 10th node had arrived, and reality prepared to accommodate its impossible geometry through systematic rewrite of the fundamental laws governing existence at soul's edge. In that moment of terrible recognition, we felt the weight of something patient and hungry, turning its focus toward our fragile humanity, cosmic intelligence that had learned to count past 9 and found the universe lacking. The universe held its breath, and in that pause between inhalation and exhalation, we understood that we were no longer investigating a threat. We had become its willing accomplices, carrying the enemy toward Terra's heart, wrapped in our own blessed hull, like a gift for gods made from spaces between stars. Mechanic ritual commenced in the astropathic sanctum, with precision born of desperation, each movement blessed despite time constraints that made proper devotion nearly impossible. Magos Logi Corda 7 etched reversed benedictions into the counterfeit 10th seat's frame, with mechadendrites that trembled under psychic pressure, binary cant flowing backward through his vox grill in patterns that hurt to hear. Sacred script carved itself into blessed metal. Devotional words reflected like dark mirrors, prayers turned inside out until they became invitations for forces that existed in spaces between thoughts. I knelt beside the seat's non-agonal base, drawing my ceremonial blade across palm lines, blessed by Schola Progenium instructors who had never imagined their teachings would lead to this heretical moment. Blood welled crimson against pale skin before crystallizing into geometric patterns that pulsed with cold inner light, each drop freezing before it could fall. My hands shook as I smeared the ice blood along the seat's edges, but my voice remained steady, intoning words I should not know, but found written in my memory, like scars. Litany of inverted light. Let darkness illuminate what brightness cannot see. Let absence reveal presence through negation. Let the void speak truth through silence made manifest. Silent Sister Sarah positioned herself upon the 10th plinth with liquid precision, her null aura expanding like winter given form. The psychic void that normally surrounded her transformed into something more substantial, a cold sun that cast shadows upward against gravity's pull, creating zones of absolute darkness where light feared to venture. Her breathing synchronized with rhythms no human lung should follow, each inhalation drawing something from dimensions containing no atmosphere. Telemetry interrupt, Geller harmonics retuning to hollow frequencies, phase lock initiated, decoy void at 43% resonance and rising, hull temperature approaching absolute zero despite thermal regulation. Corda's modifications reached critical threshold as the black ship's Geller generator shifted toward frequencies that existed between notes, harmonics tuned to create falsified absence in phase opposition to the Astronomican's pulse. The decoy void strengthened with each adjustment, creating zones of controlled interference that mimicked the 10th node's dimensional signature with mathematical precision that bordered on heresy. Phase lock at 61% and holding, Corda reported through his Vox grill, mechadendrites writhing as phantom readings flooded his systems with data that violated basic physics. Metal throughout the sanctum began ticking like cooling engines, thermal expansion occurring in absolute cold, as blessed adamantium learned to accommodate impossibilities that should have shattered molecular bonds. The absence manifested through systematic subtraction rather than addition. Sound muffled until our voices became whispers, then faded to vibrations felt through bone rather than heard through ears. Color drained from vision, like water from broken vessels, leaving the world painted in shades of gray that hurt to perceive directly. Breath became flavorless, each inhalation tasting of nothing so complete it possessed weight and texture. Reality thinned around us until we existed in a space between spaces, dimensional membrane stretched to translucency, under pressure from forces pressing through cosmic gaps. The sanctum remained physically present, but felt hollow, as if we stood inside the memory of a room rather than the room itself. Frost cracked like distant bones, as pressure differentials created sounds that bypassed hearing to resonate directly through ceramite and marrow. Telemetry. Phase lock at 73%. Geller field integrity 11% and falling. The decoy void strengthens, but entity attention focuses on resonant frequencies. Pressure built on my tongue like speaking without voice, syllables forming in my mouth before dissolving into geometric patterns that tasted of copper and void cold. The entity named me through negation, not speaking my designation, but removing the space my name would occupy, creating identity through absence rather than presence. I felt myself defined by what I was not, outlined in dimensions that existed between thoughts. Lord Inquisitor Holt invoked the Emperor's name, with voice carrying ordnance weight, each syllable carved from vows and old wars, despite the cold that had learned to climb inside his throat. By his will and sacred light, we bind what should not be to places that do not exist. His words created ripples in the thinning air, devotional force pressing against dimensional membranes like prayers made manifest. Corda's mechadendrites seized in sympathetic resonance as psychic pressure built beyond tolerance, brass digits clenching around control interfaces, while his organic eye wept frozen tears that crystallized before they could fall. Binary cant erupted from his vox grill in patterns that resembled screaming, sacred mathematics corrupted by passage through spaces where meaning moved in spirals rather than lines, the decoy void caught like flame to parchment, the sanctum dimmed to absolute darkness that possessed weight and texture, pressing against our retinas like winter made visible. Emergency lumens failed not through mechanical malfunction, but through dimensional displacement, light sources existing in spaces our eyes could no longer access. We stood in darkness so complete it created its own illumination, void light that revealed shadows cast by objects that had never learned to exist. Telemetry. Phase lock at 87% and holding. Harmonic opposition stable. Decoy void engaged successfully. Silent Sister Sarah's eyes, always dark, became bottomless pits that reflected nothing. Not absence of reflection, but active consumption of light, creating zones where photons went to die. Her null aura expanded beyond psychic void into something more fundamental, a negation that touched reality's basic structure and found it wanting. Frost spread from her position in spiraling patterns that resembled devotional script written in languages older than human prayer. The binding commenced with success that tasted of ashes and iron, phase cage holding the entity within geometries that existed between dimensions. But triumph carried the weight of cosmic attention as the absence noticed my latent psyche potential, uncatalogued sensitivity that marked me as its preferred anchor point in reality. I felt its focus like winter settling in my bones, patient hunger that had learned to count past 9 and found my untrained abilities perfectly suited for its purposes. Something vast and patient turned its attention toward my consciousness, cosmic intelligence that whispered promises in frequencies older than human speech, teaching my nervous system to register sensations from sources that should not exist. The binding held, but the entity had found its chosen vessel among us. The trap held like a fraying net stretched beyond its limits, phase cage containing the entity within, geometries that existed between dimensions, but barely maintaining structural integrity. Sections of lux mortis transformed into lightless voids, where illumination collapsed and matter ceased to exist, not through destruction, but through systematic subtraction. Objects vanishing upon contact with the absence's expanding influence. I watched a blessed Aquila pendant disappear mid-fall, not hitting deck plating, but simply ending, its golden surface erased from reality, like a word crossed from sacred text with deliberate precision. Magos Logicorda 7 tied his consciousness directly to the black ship's machine spirit, through neural interface cables that sparked with each data exchange, maintaining the phase cage through Binharic chanting that transformed his vox grill into a conduit for mechanical prayers. His organic eye wept ice tears that crystallized before they could fall, each frozen droplet containing microscopic frost patterns resembling circuit diagrams mapped in dimensions our instruments could not detect. Binary cant flowed from his throat in patterns that hurt to hear. Sacred mathematics corrupted by passage through spaces where meaning moved in spirals rather than straight lines, each syllable carved from devotion and desperation in equal measure. The absence pressed against containment edges, like cosmic tide seeking higher ground, dimensional pressure, building beyond tolerance as reality strained under the binding's weight. Voices on Vox channels were sucked away mid-transmission, leaving only static that sounded like distant ash falls drifting across cathedral roofs. The whisper of prayers burned cold in furnaces that consumed faith rather than fed it. Each lost word strengthened the entity's influence, communication failures feeding its hunger for silence that had learned to multiply through consumption of its own nature. Telemetry interrupt. Phase cage at 87% stability, but fluctuating. Containment edges showing stress fractures. Geller field integrity 7% and falling. Hull temperature absolute 0, despite thermal regulation. Revealed truth emerged through layers of encrypted documentation as I accessed the sanctum's data cores with trembling fingers, bureaucratic training manifesting as compulsive inventory taking, while cosmic horror unfolded around us. This entity was a bezoar of silences woven at soul's edge, every choked prayer, swallowed scream, and unmade warp eddy knotted by the corrupted Aegis choir into hunger-given form. 3 centuries of defensive exorcism had created something worse than the threats they sought to repel, teaching emptiness how to feed on emptiness until it developed appetite for existence itself. "It favors you, interrogator," Corda rasped through his Vox grill, mechadendrites writhing as phantom readings flooded his systems. Latent psychic sensitivity, uncatalogued, untrained, you are the perfect anchor for its manifestation. The words struck like solar wind, my hereditary shame made manifest, psychic potential flowing through my bloodline, like tainted water seeking its own level. Each stuttered heartbeat synchronized with the entity's rhythm, biological functions aligning with cosmic mathematics that rewrote fundamental rules governing life at soul's edge. The moral pivot crystallized with liturgical clarity. Either I opened myself as temporary anchor, risking corruption to hold the absence while cyclonic charges severed the array, or it slipped free to hunt sunward toward Terra's heart. Each option led toward damnation through different mathematics, calculated in souls rather than currency. But one path offered sacrifice, while the other promised only failure spreading through the Imperium's psychic networks, like poison in a saint's bloodstream. Lord Inquisitor Holt's face remained liturgically stone as I confessed my hidden potential through chattering teeth, words crystallizing in air so cold they formed geometric patterns before dissolving into dimensional static. Uncatalogued psyker ability, sensitivity threshold unknown, hereditary markers suggesting beta-class potential. He didn't flinch at this revelation of unsanctioned psychic capability. His expression carried the weight of decisions made in chambers, absent from any schematic, where the Imperium's survival required accommodating heresies that would damn lesser servants. "The Emperor protects," he intoned, voice carrying ordnance weight. "But sometimes his protection requires his servants to become instruments of sacrifice. Terra asks hard prices, interrogator. We have no cheaper currency to pay." Environmental pressure built beyond measurement as reality strained under the binding's weight. Hull plates screaming inaudibly as they stretched against forces pressing from directions containing no space. Metal throughout the sanctum developed stress fractures, not physical damage but dimensional tears, where blessed adamantium learned to doubt its own molecular structure. Space itself showed signs of strain, corners becoming acute angles that hurt to perceive directly, surfaces developing curvature in directions our eyes could not follow. Telemetry, 5% Geller field integrity, atmospheric pressure fluctuating in patterns that violate basic physics, phase cage holding through Emperor's grace and mathematical impossibility. Silent Sister Sarah's null aura flickered like failing lumens as psychic void developed cracks that let wrongness seep through spaces between thoughts. She signed urgent warnings in battle count. Corruption spreads, geometry completes, something vast prepares to wake. Her eyes, always dark, had become bottomless pits that reflected nothing. Active consumption of light, creating zones where photons went to die. Astropath Ivir pressed deeper into his psychic hood, blind eyes streaming frozen tears as he tasted the Emperor's light for flavors speaking of hunger and patient malevolence. "The Astronomicon carries the wrong. Note now," he whispered through lips blue with cold. "Golden radiance tastes of absence, as if something has learned to sing along with the Master's song, and taught it harmonies older than human speech." The decision crystallized like ice in vacuum as I approached the 10th seat's corrupted surface, each step creating frost patterns on deck plating that resembled devotional script written in languages predating human prayer. Kneeling beside the plinth, I touched its blessed metal with fingers that had learned to conduct cosmic attention, feeling reality itch at the contact between flesh and geometry that should not exist. My heart adopted the 10th beat immediately. Not addition, but transformation, biological rhythm aligning with mathematics that counted past sacred limitations. The sensation felt like drowning in reverse, each pulse drawing something from dimensions containing no atmosphere, while expelling warmth through capillaries that had learned to conduct cold more efficiently than blood. "I will hold," I whispered, through lips that crystallized each word into geometric patterns spelling doom in languages older than human speech. Frost began forming on my mouth as syllables froze mid-utterance, devotional commitment becoming prayer, made manifest through systematic corruption of my biological functions. Each word tasted of ashes and iron, sealing my fate with the certainty that holding the absence would require more than temporary anchor. It would demand permanent transformation, turning my flesh into a container for something that existed through subtraction rather than addition. Telemetry. Phase cage stable at 91%. Containment holding through human anchor point. Cyclonic charges armed and ready for array severance. The absence settles into biological matrix, testing the strength of flesh and faith against cosmic hunger. Something vast and patient settled into my consciousness, like winter taking residence in cathedral stones, cosmic intelligence that had learned to count past 9 and found my untrained abilities perfectly suited for its purposes. The binding strengthened through my willing sacrifice, but I felt the entity's true nature flowing through my nervous system. Not malevolence, but hunger so pure it had transcended concepts like good and evil, becoming appetite without purpose or limit. The price of Terra's protection was measured in the systematic corruption of my humanity, one impossible heartbeat at a time. Climactic ascent began as I became willing conduit for forces that existed in spaces between prayers, aligning my breath to the wrong hymn, until biological rhythm synchronized with cosmic mathematics that counted past sacred limitations. Each exhalation drew heat from my marrow, like iron pulled from forge fire, warmth fleeing through capillaries that had learned to conduct cold more efficiently than blood. Ash flaked from my lips, The residue of prayers burnt cold by passage through my corrupted essence, each particle tasting of copper and void, cold as devotional words, transformed into crystalline dust that drifted upward against gravity's pull. Silent Sister Sera's null aura, braided with my involuntary psychic spark, opposite natures creating binding edge that held the absence in place through systematic violation of reality's basic structure. Her psychic void and my untrained sensitivity wove together like rope made from concepts that disagreed about their fundamental nature. Emptiness and potential, silence and whisper, negation and barely controlled power, creating harmony through discord that made the universe itch to accommodate our impossible collaboration. Lord Inquisitor Holt recited funeral litanies for the living with voice-carrying ordnance weight, each syllable carved from vows and old wars, despite the cold that had learned to climb inside his throat. Emperor, preserve these souls who walk between life and duty. Grant them peace in service that transcends flesh. Let their sacrifice illuminate darkness that brightness cannot reach. His words created ripples in the thinning air, devotional force pressing against dimensional membranes like prayers made manifest. Telemetry interrupt, cyclonic charges armed and ready. Theta 9 and sibling stations mapped for severance. Detonation sequence initiated. Geller field integrity 3%, and holding through Emperor's grace and mathematical impossibility. Magos Logi Corda 7 counted down charge arming in Binharik Kant that transformed his Vox Grill into conduit for mechanical prayers, mechadendrites writhing as phantom readings flooded his systems. Charges 1 through 9 armed, targeting solutions locked, severance pattern calculated to scatter array geometry across void. His organic eye wept frozen tears that crystallized before they could fall, each droplet containing microscopic frost patterns resembling circuit diagrams, mapped in dimensions our instruments could not detect. Environment tightened beyond tolerance as reality strained under the binding's weight. Metal throughout the sanctum shrieked at frequencies that bypassed hearing to vibrate directly through bone and ceramite, blessed adamantium screaming inaudibly as it stretched against forces pressing from directions containing no space. Temperature plummeted until each breath crystallized midair into geometric patterns that resembled devotional script, atmospheric pressure building like weight on our souls, while touch lost texture as if the world smeared under dimensional pressure. Through my connection to the entity, perception expanded beyond human limitations as I experienced the Aegis choir as a ring of hollow bells arranged in perfect non-agonal geometry around Soul's edge. Each station told notes of absolute nothing, creating harmony through absence that resonated across dimensions our instruments could not detect. 9 throats made of silence had held back storms for centuries, but we had given them a 10th, and the circle looked complete in a way that made reality sick. I dragged the entity into Sera's seat thread by psychic thread, weaving it into the counterfeit geometry through systematic violation of my own nervous system. Each strand of connection felt like ice wire drawn through my consciousness, binding the absence to blessed metal through sacrifice measured in the systematic corruption of my humanity. The process transformed flesh into container for something that existed through subtraction rather than addition, biological functions aligning with mathematics older than human prayer. Telemetry, binding at 97% completion. Phase cage stable through human anchor point. Cyclonic charges ready for immediate detonation. All stations targeted for simultaneous severance. Astropath Evir pressed deeper into his psychic hood, voice barely a reed whisper, as he guided the binding process. "Outline it. Give it edges. Give it a place that is not you." I gave it the counterfeit throne, my fear because fear had crisp borders, the fraction between chime and echo where meaning lived. The entity took each gift with grateful hunger and grew smaller, tighter, more defined, like storm wind tamed to a bottle that wanted to break. The Astronomicon flared in response to our heretical success. A solar scream felt through bone and ceramite, as Terra's sacred light acknowledged the wrong note threaded through its golden radiance. The rhythm changed to include 10 tones, writing new rules into the cosmos at Soul's edge through systematic rewrite of the fundamental laws governing psychic illumination. Each beat carried weight beyond sound, vibrating through dimensions we could not perceive until our marrow wanted to genuflect before altars that had never been built. Environmental pressure reached crescendo as bulkheads throughout the black ship bowed inward under no measurable force, hull plates groaning as they stretched against thermal impossibility, while reality prepared to accommodate something that existed in spaces between thoughts. Sarah's shadow climbed the walls, casting darkness upward, staining votive parchment, and crawling across machine saint faces carved into blessed metal. Telemetry. Phase lock 99%. Cyclonic charges armed across all stations. Severance pattern locked. Detonation sequence at final threshold. Lord Inquisitor Holt's thumb hovered over the detonation rune, while the 10th tone resonated in his skull, like prayer bells made from crystallized silence. Pressing now might lock the pattern forever, encoding the entity's influence into the Astronomicon's sacred song for all eternity. Or it might save Terra through destruction, scattering the array's corrupted geometry across void before the infection could spread sunward through the Imperium's psychic networks. The moment crystallized like ice in vacuum, as Holt processed implications with liturgical stone composure. His face remained impassive, but strain showed in white, knuckles beneath ceremonial gauntlets. Without hesitation, born of faith in the Emperor's will, he pressed the detonation rune and committed us all to fire. The decision tasted of ashes and iron, sealing our fate with the certainty that success would be measured in the systematic destruction of everything we had sworn to protect. Telemetry. Detonation sequence initiated. Charges armed. Severance pattern locked. The Emperor protects through fire and sacrifice. Something vast and patient turned its attention toward our final gambit, cosmic intelligence recognizing the trap closing around its impossible geometry. Fire bloomed across the void like prayers made manifest, cyclonic charges detonating simultaneously across 9 stations in brilliant annihilation designed to scatter the Aegis Choir's sacred geometry before corruption could spread toward Terra's heart. The universe held its breath to see which mathematics would prove stronger, Sacred 9 or Corrupted 10, while we burned in service to the Golden Throne. Detonation transformed the Aegis array into a broken halo as cyclonic charges vaporized linkages in fast-flash annihilation, 9 points of nuclear fire blooming simultaneously across the void like prayers made manifest. The Nonagon's sacred geometry, scattered across dimensional space, each explosion creating ripples that propagated through reality's membrane with force enough to shatter crystalline silence that had held for centuries. Through my connection to the entity, I felt each impact like hammer blows against cosmic mathematics, dimensional anchors severing one by one with percussive finality that made the universe ring like struck iron. The decoy void buckled under explosive pressure, phase cage twisting the absence into forms that violated three-dimensional space as containment fields collapsed in cascade failure. The entity writhed within its geometric prison, like shadow cloth torn by stellar wind, impossible angles knotting into configurations that hurt to perceive peripherally. But the binding held through sheer force of will and sacrifice, reality straining under pressure from forces that existed in spaces between thoughts. Silent Sister Sarah screamed. A Null's first scream felt more than heard as psychic pressure inverted her fundamental nature. The sound bypassed our ears entirely, vibrating through bone and ceramite until our marrow wanted to weep in sympathetic resonance. Her null aura collapsed inward like a star dying backward, psychic void becoming something more substantial than absence, creating zones where silence possessed measurable weight and texture. Blood ran from her ears in geometric patterns that resembled devotional script written in languages older than human speech. Telemetry interrupt. Cyclonic detonation successful. 9 stations vaporized. Aegis array geometry scattered. Geller coil integrity 9%. And falling through systematic grace rather than mechanical function. Lord Inquisitor Holt stood liturgically stone as blood crystallized along his jawline, chanting the litany of absolution for the living dead, with voice carrying ordnance weight, despite the cold that had learned to climb inside his throat. Emperor, preserve these souls who burn in service. Grant them peace in fire that transcends flesh. Let their sacrifice illuminate darkness that brightness cannot reach. His words created ripples in thinning air, devotional force pressing against dimensional membranes like prayers made manifest. Magos logi corda seven's flesh cooked from within his own cogitator halo, as he maintained the phase field to his final bite, organic components failing under thermal stress that registered no measurable temperature. His mechadendrites writhed in patterns resembling death throes, but his neural interface held, consciousness tied directly to the black ship's machine spirit through devotion stronger than death. His final transmission arrived as benediction, binary cant, that translated to, "For function I surrender form," before his organic eye burst in steam that smelled of ozone and sanctity. Lux Mortis split along its dorsal spine seam, under dimensional pressure that pressed from directions containing no space, whole plates separating with sounds like cathedral stones, cracking under cosmic weight. But the seals held, glued by frozen prayers and the Emperor's protection, blessed adamantium refusing to acknowledge impossibility, even as reality rewrote fundamental laws around us. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut with percussive finality, isolating breached sections, while atmospheric processors screamed protests against air that had forgotten how to sustain human life. I unthreaded the last tendrils of absence into the collapsing 10th seat, tearing shadow cloth into ragged fragments that dissipated into impossible angles as the entity's geometry compressed under explosive pressure. Each strand of connection felt like ice wire drawn through my consciousness, binding the absence to blessed metal through sacrifice measured in the systematic corruption of my humanity. The process transformed flesh into container for something that existed through subtraction rather than addition, biological functions aligning with mathematics older than human prayer. Telemetry. Geller coil 7% and holding through Emperor's grace. Hull integrity maintained despite dimensional stress fractures. Phase cage stable through human anchor point. The 9th beat returned to the Astronomican's rhythm as Terra's sacred light reasserted dominance over Soul's psychic boundaries, golden radiance flowing pure through channels that had learned to carry corruption. Environmental pressure began normalizing as reality reasserted basic laws governing existence at Soul's edge. Temperature rose from absolute zero by degrees, measured in prayers rather than kelvins, frost patterns melting into water that ran uphill before remembering gravity's proper direction. But triumph tasted of ashes and iron. A faint echo of the 10th tone lingered like cosmic afterimage, wrong note threaded through the master's song, with barely measurable influence that might grow again, given time and opportunity. The binding succeeded, but victory carried permanent corruption as I felt the negative hymn coiled small inside my chest, like a parasite made of crystallized silence. My every 9th breath stuttered, biological rhythm forever altered by passage through dimensions containing no atmosphere. A phantom 10th beat tapped my ribs from within, cosmic percussion that would mark my heartbeat for whatever remained of my life. Across Sol system, Auspex stations detected systemic anomaly threading through the Astronomican's sacred song. A 10th tone, barely measurable but undeniably present. Wrong note learned from the choir's reversed harmonies. Monk astronomers at Luna's bastions watched their instruments register fluctuations that should not exist, quill lines lifting when they should lie flat. Observatory reports arrived identical and reluctant. Microscopic corruption threaded through the Emperor's light like dark thread through royal cloth. Telemetry. Containment stable. Entity bound within human matrix. Influence reduced to whispers. Systematic monitoring required for corruption assessment. The entity settled into my nervous system like winter taking residence in cathedral stones. Cosmic intelligence reduced to whispers, but patient as geological time. I felt its true nature flowing through my consciousness. Not malevolence, but hunger so pure it transcended concepts like good and evil, becoming appetite without purpose or limit. The price of Terra's protection was measured in the systematic corruption of my humanity, one impossible heartbeat at a time. Astropath Evir pressed deeper into his psychic hood, blind eyes streaming frozen tears as he tasted the Emperor's light for flavors that spoke of victory measured in acceptable losses. "The Astronomican holds," he whispered through lips blue with cold. "Golden radiance flows pure, but something small swims within it, a fish made of silence, learning to breathe in light." We had saved Terra, but the universe had learned a new song, and its harmonies spoke of hunger and patience older than stars. The negative hymn would echo through the Imperium's psychic networks, like infection waiting for opportunity to multiply. Each pulse of the Emperor's light carrying microscopic corruption that might grow again given time and the right circumstances. Containment held, but containment was not victory, merely postponement of mathematics that counted past 9 toward completion that would never truly end. Aftermath unfolded in Quarantined Bay 7 at Luna's dark side bastion, where sterile lumens cast shadows that fell at proper angles, and air tasted of recycled prayers instead of crystallized silence. Decontamination protocols proceeded with ritual precision. Blessed oils, purification incense, medici, readings that painted our survival in vital statistics barely recognizable as human. The chamber sealed around us, like a sarcophagus, built for the living, servo skulls circling with auspex arrays that died when they approached silent Sister Sarah's motionless form. I removed my helm and watched vapor crystallize into tiny nonagons before atmospheric processors swallowed them, as if Luna's blessed infrastructure had learned our enemy's geometry and filed it under pest control. Lord Inquisitor Holt stood beside me, blood rinsed to pink streaks along his ceremonial gorget, expression carved from liturgical stone, despite the phantom 10th beat I knew pulsed in his ribs as it did mine. The toll registered like inventory taken in a mausoleum. Holt and I remained functional despite biological alterations that would require lifetime monitoring, each 9th breath stuttering, fingernails developing frost patterns beneath the keratin that pulsed with cold inner light when observed peripherally. Silent Sister Sarah lay catatonic in restraint cradles, eyes reflecting nothing, while her null aura flickered between existence and void like a dying star, learning to breathe backward. Magos Logi Corda 7's essence had merged with machine spirits beyond recovery, his consciousness distributed through cogitator networks like digital prayer, brass mechadendrites arranged on blessed trays for final rites. Telemetry interrupt, Day 3, quarantine. Subjects, Holt and Varank, stable with anomalous cardiac rhythm. Subject, Sarah, unresponsive, null aura fluctuating. Corda 7 classification, essence dispersed, recovery impossible. An Ordo Malleus edict arrived bearing the sigillite's seal, parchment that felt heavier than lead and tasted of decisions made in chambers absent from any schematic. The orders carried weight beyond paper. Purge all records of Aegis Choir operations, deny retune protocol existence, ascribe black ship lux mortis loss to routine warp plague encountered during standard patrol duties. Truth transformed into lie through bureaucratic alchemy designed to protect Terra from knowledge that would spread panic through the Imperium's psychic networks, like infection through a saint's bloodstream. Holt's face became liturgical stone as he signed documents with a pen that bled sanctified iron, each signature sealing our testimony into classification levels that transcended standard Imperial security protocols. He did not tremble. He did not look at me. He pressed his ring to wax and transformed miracles into footnotes, heroism into heresy, through systematic denial of cosmic horror. What we witnessed never occurred, he intoned with voice carrying ordnance weight. What we fought never existed. What we sacrificed was never lost, because there was never anything to lose. I tallied costs in ritual cadence, because there has to be a ledger, even in horror, especially in horror. Names, ranks, serial numbers formed a saint's roll call of the sacrificed. Tempestor Prime, Ras, vanished between frames with boots aligned to glyphs. No map admits. Astropath Evir, consciousness scattered across dimensional static. Crew of Lux Mortis, consumed by silence that possessed measurable weight. Each designation carried weight beyond military protocol. Human lives reduced to data points in calculations measuring acceptable losses against Terra's survival. Telemetry report. Astronomicon maintains stability with fractional variations. Beat 9 shows 0.3 second dimming. Beat 10 registers ghost echo, amplitude negligible but persistent. The Astronomicon held its sacred rhythm like a sun seen through cathedral glass. But Auspex stations across Sol system confirmed microscopic corruption, threading through the Emperor's light like dark thread through royal cloth. The 9th beat dimmed by fractions, measurable only through instruments blessed for detecting heresy, while a ghost echo on the 10th whispered like distant drums in cosmic fog. Observatory reports arrived identical and reluctant. Something small swam within the Master's song, learning to breathe in light that had never known contamination. They put me behind warded glass, where prayers were soldered into the seams. Medici in rust-red aprons moved like officiants through rituals they had performed too many times to pretend surprise. Every 9th minute they cycled my blood through freezing cradles, drawing plasma down to crystalline clarity, seeking the lattices cold summoned from my corruption. Patterns bloomed on slides, nonagons collapsing into 10th spokes that bent and rejoined like broken halos, geometric formations that pulsed with cold inner light when servo-cherubs held them to lumens. I recorded sworn testament because a record must exist, even buried in vaults without doors. My tone remained clinical to stop my hands from shaking. Dates, positions, amplitudes, the precise cold at which the negative hymn opened its eye inside my blood. I described Sarah's impossible scream, Corda's final bite, Holt's breath falling into rhythms no mortal lung should know. My words looked small on the slate, like ants spelling defiance at cathedral foundations, but truth demanded documentation, regardless of official denial. Encrypted transmission. Origin beneath Imperial Palace. Classification beyond clearance. Content. Sworn oath repeated in syllables, arranged according to 10th tone's rhythm. The reply came through frequencies that made reality itch, static parted like torn veils, as a voice colder than void passed my testimony through harmonic patterns that counted past 9, toward completion that would never truly end. It used pauses as instruments, making room for beats that did not belong to human rhythm. My oath returned, transformed. Same words, wrong cadence, syllables arranged according to mathematics older than prayer. Environmental anomalies spread through Luna's blessed infrastructure, like infection learning to multiply through sacred systems. Lumens began guttering in patterns that violated random probability. 9 beats, pause, then 10, establishing new rhythm that propagated through lighting networks with systematic precision. Emergency generators maintained power, but illumination carried wrongness that pressed against retinas like winter made visible. Quarantine log. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating facility-wide. Lumen systems showing synchronized anomalies. Containment protocols upgraded to maximum classification. The chapter's end crystallized as Holt approached the warded glass without escort, courtesy or apology in his measured steps. We stood like reliquaries on opposite sides of barriers, designed to contain dimensional contamination. His lips-shaped words I could not hear through reinforced ceramite. Orders, comfort, catechisms to hold reality's seams together. I touched glass and left prints like failed snowflakes, while he lifted his hand and left nothing at all. Candles throughout the observation chamber guttered first in 9 beats, then 10, wax crystallizing into geometric patterns that resembled devotional script written in languages predating human speech. The facility's machine spirits began whispering fragments through vox networks, blessed cogitators learning songs they should not know. Each pulse carried microscopic corruption that spread through communication systems like digital prayer, teaching sacred technology to count past limitations that had protected the Imperium for millennia. Something vast and patient settled into Luna's infrastructure, cosmic intelligence reduced to whispers, but spreading through systems designed to serve the Golden Throne. The negative hymn had found new throats, and its echoes would carry until every prayer offered in the Emperor's name carried the faintest trace of the 10th tone's mathematics, a corruption so subtle it might take millennia to manifest, but inevitable as entropy itself. Resolution carried cosmic horror's lingering dread as containment orders arrived, bearing seals that bled sanctified iron across parchment, heavy with decisions made in chambers, absent from any schematic. Exclusion absolute marked the broken halo's coordinates, with classifications beyond standard Imperial security protocols. Never return, never investigate, never acknowledge the scattered geometry where 9 points of nuclear fire had transformed the Aegis array into ash and memory. Servo skulls seeded marker buoys across the void, each beacon broadcasting warnings in frequencies that bypassed hearing to vibrate directly through bone and ceramite. The wreck of Lux Mortis received guided trajectory into Sol's nuclear fire, accompanied by rites of purgation broadcast on channels that made atmospheric processors stutter in sympathetic resonance. Tech priests chanted binary cant from observation stations, positioned at safe distances measured in astronomical units, watching blessed adamantium dissolve in stellar flame, while each fragment carried microscopic corruption into fusion reactions older than human civilization. The black ship burned like a prayer made manifest, but I felt the phantom 10th beat in my ribs, knowing some essence had escaped through dimensions that existed between thoughts. Administrative record, subject Sarah transferred to Vault Omega classification under Silent Sisterhood custody. Her bottomless eyes reflected truths that must never surface, null aura flickering between existence and void like a dying star, learning to breathe backward. They carried her through corridors where silence possessed measurable weight, placing her in warded cells designed to contain dimensional contamination through systematic isolation from reality's basic structure. Recovery prognosis: impossible. Status: permanent containment. Lord Inquisitor Holt received summons to chambers that officially did not exist, walking between statues that did not blink but somehow watched through carved eyes that tracked movement across dimensions our instruments could not detect. He entered spaces where the Golden Throne's influence pressed against reality's membrane, with force enough to bend light around corners containing no space, carrying the weight of cosmic attention like snow on his ceremonial gorget. His face remained liturgical stone as he disappeared into rooms where the Imperium's survival was measured in acceptable heresies. I transferred to Terra under guard that pretended to be escort, custodian shadows moving with liquid precision through corridors where every 9th step echoed with phantom percussion. My every 9th heartbeat stuttered, biological rhythm forever altered by passage through dimensions containing no atmosphere, while phantom 10th beats tapped my ribs from within, the entity's gift that would keep giving until my flesh failed under systematic corruption. Each pulse carried wrongness through my circulatory system like digital prayer, teaching my nervous system to register sensations from sources that should not exist. Telemetry interrupt. Atmospheric composition nominal with trace anomalies. Electromagnetic fields showing systematic variations. Lumen systems throughout Sanctum displaying synchronized fluctuations in 9-beat patterns, with 10th beat echoes propagating through blessed infrastructure. The approach to the Eternity Gate unfolded like pilgrimage through mathematics made manifest, each step carrying weight beyond physical measurement as I walked beneath statues carved from obedience. Wind at Terra's edge carried dust and incense mixed with metallic tang of absence, atmospheric currents flowing through patterns that resembled devotional script written in languages older than human speech. The air itself had learned new harmonies, carrying microscopic corruption through ventilation systems designed to serve the Golden Throne. Candles along the sanctum's nave guttered in rhythms no longer purely 9, wax crystallizing into geometric patterns that pulsed with cold inner light when observed. Peripherally, each flame counted past sacred limitations toward completion that rewrote fundamental laws governing illumination within the palace itself. The recurring motif transformed through systematic corruption. 9 kneel, 1 rises, became 10 listen, as the universe itself developed new ears, cosmic attention, learning to perceive harmonies that had never existed in reality's original composition. I halted before the Golden Throne's distant radiance, feeling the cosmos listen back through my corrupted essence as something vast and patient acknowledged my presence. The master of mankind remained motionless upon his throne of blessed gold, but the air around his form carried wrongness that pressed against perception like winter made visible. Somewhere in the deep palace, machinery whispered fragments through Vox networks, teaching sacred technology to count past limitations that had protected the Imperium for millennia. Final telemetry. Astronomican rhythm stable with systematic variations. 10th tone amplitude negligible but persistent. Propagation vector. Outward from Sol toward Imperium's edge. Estimated corruption spread. Millennia for full manifestation. The Astronomicon paused between 9 and 10. Barely measurable hesitation that registered on instruments blessed for detecting heresy. Golden radiance seeming to hear its own song with new understanding. Each pulse carried microscopic corruption through the Imperium's psychic networks, like infection through a saint's bloodstream. The 10th tone propagating beyond Sol, like thread tugging at reality's most sacred illumination. Observatory reports arrived identical and reluctant. Something small swam within the master's light, learning to breathe in radiance that had never known contamination. I felt the negative hymn coiled in my chest like a parasite made of crystallized silence, each breath carrying corruption deeper into my biological systems, while the entity whispered promises in frequencies older than human speech. The throne remained a silent sun, blazing with psychic fire, but now it listened back through dimensions we could not perceive. In that cosmic attention, something fundamental about faith and reality had changed forever. Not through destruction, but through subtle alteration of the universe's basic harmonies. The horror persisted not in immediate catastrophe, but in patient transformation. Cosmic corruption so subtle it might take millennia to manifest full implications. Every prayer offered in the Emperor's name would now carry the faintest echo of the 10th tone, microscopic wrongness spreading through the Imperium's most sacred rituals, like digital infection propagating through blessed networks. I carried the entity's influence within my blood and breath, walking proof that Terra's protection had been purchased with acceptable contamination of existence itself. Somewhere in the deep palace, candles began guttering in patterns that matched my corrupted heartbeat, and I knew the infection had found new throats through which to sing its patient song of completion. The negative hymn would spread like winter through the Imperium's most sacred spaces, teaching the universe to count past 9, until every prayer carried echoes of mathematics older than human civilization, corruption so perfect it would become indistinguishable from faith itself. The cosmos had learned a new song, and its harmonies spoke of hunger patient as geological time.